Alright guys, so in this video, I'm going to be discussing the top 5 teams under the most pressure to win in 2024. Now, this is a metric that really doesn't matter, but it is interesting in the offseason to talk about teams that need, you would think, to win in 2024 based off of their current predicament. Beginning with number 5, it is Texas. Now, you could say Texas because they very likely will have Arch Manning next year. This year isn't crazy must win. But, returning Quinn Ewers, they're going to be a top 3 team in college football. Steve Sarkisian still trying to prove himself and get into that ultra elite tier in terms of coaching. The disappointing end of the year with the loss to Washington, a game they were trailing throughout. And again, you do return Quinn Ewers, right now the favorite to win the Heisman in 2024. You will be a preseason top 3 team, and you are joining the SEC. So it's very important for Texas to come into the SEC. We can go through their schedule. You've got a very tough Week 2 game at Michigan. But you would think Michigan losing their quarterback, losing Harbaugh, a little bit of an opening there with Texas returning everyone. Maybe Texas goes into that game as slight road favorites. And what a huge early season win that would be in the Big House. UTSA, UL Monroe, you take a look at their SEC schedule. Mississippi State at home. You do have Oklahoma in the rivalry neutral site game. You get Georgia at home, probably a night game. Huge one there. At Vanderbilt, very winnable. Florida at home. At Arkansas, Kentucky, and at Texas A&M. It's an extremely manageable schedule for Texas, and that's why so many people expect them not only to make the playoff, but get one of the top 4 byes. If they win the SEC, they would be very likely a top 2 team. Their huge game against Georgia, that's going to decide their regular season and where they finish in the SEC more than likely. Also the rivalry game with Oklahoma, but you're missing LSU. You're missing Alabama. You're missing Ole Miss in this schedule. So Texas, there is a pressure to take that next step with Quinn Ewers returning for his senior season. I'm putting them at number 5. Moving on to number 4, it is another SEC team. It is Ole Miss. So Ole Miss went all out in the transfer portal. They got multiple stud pass rushers. They kind of had a little bit of a weird situation with Judkins, the star running back, leaving kind of out of nowhere after they went all in. But either way, they're still going to have a very good team returning Jackson Dart. A lot of people hyping them up. We remember how Ole Miss finished the season in a New Year's 6 game, the Peach Bowl, crushing Penn State and finishing ranked very high. And you take a look at their schedule, it starts off extremely easy. Look at that non-conference. Furman, Middle Tennessee, on the road at Wake Forest, whoop-de-doo. Georgia Southern at home. Georgia Southern, they're decent on offense. I'm joking. I'm trolling. Actually, Georgia Southern for their conference is decent, but in terms of going on the road at Ole Miss, you're not going to win that game. And then they get Kentucky at home. So basically, they're guaranteed to start 5-0 on the road at South Carolina, very likely 6-0. At LSU, going to be challenging. They get a bye week. They get Oklahoma at home, at Arkansas, Georgia, but at home. Another off week at Florida, Mississippi State. Very, very manageable schedule. You're missing Texas. You're missing Alabama. And really, you're looking at LSU and Georgia as being the 2 big dogs there. Also, maybe Oklahoma, but they play, them at home. So overall, for Ole Miss, very critical year. Minimum, they need a playoff appearance. After everything that's happened this offseason, coming in with so much momentum, Lane Kiffin, the weird situation surrounding him where it seems like every offseason he might leave. He just jumps from place to place. Very important, Ole Miss. You don't have to win the SEC. You don't have to get that first round bye, but it's very important that based off of everything that's happened with all the momentum, you've got to make the playoff. If you don't make the playoff, you could see Lane Kiffin leaving. You're going to lose Jackson Dart, and we know how these things happen if the head coach leaves. I would be very concerned if I was Ole Miss. This is a house of cards. It could come crashing down if you lose your head coach. We've seen the situations play out at other schools where, with how easy and accessible the transfer portal is and an immediate eligibility, if you lose your head coach, it's going to be very challenging. So Ole Miss needs a good year next year, and we will see. They are under some pressure. Moving on to number 3, it is USC. So USC, very disappointing. The reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams, comes back for his junior year, and they just can't play defense. And Lincoln Riley, he would even admit what a huge mistake it was to not fire Alex Grinch when everyone said he should have before the start of last year. They've got the terrible defense. It ruins Caleb Williams' junior year, and they lose 5 games. They did have a good takeaway there at the end in their bowl game where Miller Moss came out and looked great, and he very likely will be their starting quarterback this coming year. Taking a look at USC's schedule, listen, this is huge for Lincoln Riley. People are starting to think he's a fraud. He can't hire a good defensive coach. And now he's joining the Big Ten. They've got so much talent on this roster, this USC roster. Can they put it together? That's a huge week 1 game against LSU in Vegas. That'll be on Sunday, the 7:30 game on ABC. Then they get Utah State at home. That's a free win. At Michigan, obviously very challenging. But again, the situation with Michigan, it's a new QB. We don't know who's actually going to be their quarterback. They might look in the portal in the spring, but they're also going to have a new head coach. It's winnable. It's going to be tough, but how huge would that be for USC to enter the Big Ten, your first game on the road in the Big House, and you win? You get Wisconsin at home. Very winnable. At Minnesota, winnable. Penn State, that's going to be challenging, but you get them at home. At Maryland, Rutgers at home. On the road at Washington, which I think is really winnable considering Washington's going to take a major step back. You get Nebraska at UCLA, and then the rivalry game with Notre Dame. So that is a brutal non-conference schedule. You look at their non-conference, LSU, Utah State, Notre Dame. It's tough. It's very critical that USC has a good year. I would say playoff mix, 9-3. Maybe you get in as like an 11 seed or something like that. But Lincoln Riley, things could fall off for Lincoln Riley. And let's understand that Lincoln Riley, he still hasn't tested the NFL waters yet. He could very easily go 7-5, see the writing on the wall and how tough the Big Ten is, and just ghost USC football. And they would have to get someone else, and it would be a mess. They would lose so many players to the portal, so it's a big year for USC. Moving on to number 2 in teams with the most pressure, it is Alabama. Now, Alabama, a little bit polarizing considering the amount of success that they've had recently. You would think that maybe, they have 3 or 4 bad years. It's not that big of a deal. They've already got like 6 national titles in the last decade. But it is a big year, considering Nick Saban, the retirement, the loss to Michigan, Jalen Milroe coming back, losing multiple elite-level players to the portal, Caleb Downs, Caden Proctor, and now you've got a head coach from Washington. It'll be really interesting. The first year is huge for Alabama. You look at their schedule, it starts off relatively easy. That week 3 game on the road in Camp Randall, if it's a night game, could be challenging. But then you have the first SEC game versus Georgia, gonna be huge. They get them in Tuscaloosa, on the road at Vanderbilt, a free win. South Carolina, easy win. At Tennessee could be challenging. You get Missouri at home, but Missouri's going to be good next year. You would expect Alabama to win that game, though. They just have way more talent. It's very important everyone understand that Alabama still has a top 3 roster in terms of overall talent, even with the players that they lost. At LSU is challenging. You get Mercer. At Oklahoma is challenging. It's a very tough schedule for Alabama. So, imagine an 8-4 year with DeBoer, his first year of being a head coach for the Crimson Tide. That's a lot of pressure, and I do think it's going to be very important for Alabama. 9-3 at least, but preferably 10-2 or 11-1. Even if they go 9-3, there's going to be people that are pissed off. And then moving on to the number 1 team under the most pressure, it has to be Ohio State. So everything that's transpired with Ohio State, with Ryan Day losing 3 straight times to Michigan, not getting over the hump, no national titles since 2014 for a team that constantly has a top 3 most talented roster in college football. Jim Harbaugh leaves after winning the national title. Ryan Day goes out and Ohio State utilizes their NIL. They get elite level transfers, and now they're a preseason top 2 team, and they've got a ridiculously easy schedule. The pressure is on. Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, 3 free wins. On the road at MSU, Iowa, more free wins. And then the big game, middle of the season, at Oregon. That could be a rematch in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon's going to be a top 5 team. Ohio State's going to be a top 5 team. Nebraska at Penn State, possibly a whiteout game. You get Purdue on the road at Northwestern. That game's probably at Wrigley Field, if I had to guess. Indiana at home, and then they do host Michigan. You would expect Ohio State after 3 straight losses with Michigan losing. both their head coach and their QB, the Buckeyes, to win that game, but who knows with Ryan Day really struggling against Michigan recently. But I don't think you can argue anything else but Ohio State being the number one team under the most pressure, with Michigan winning the national title, with Harbaugh leaving, with Ryan Day being 1-3 against Michigan, getting all these high-level transfers, having a ridiculously talented defense, with all of these players returning for Ohio State as well. They are the team under the most pressure in 2024 to win and win big. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.